There is no doubt that each man is justified in using force if necessary to defend himself against physical harm, against theft of the fruits of his labor, and against his enslavement by another. Indeed, the early pioneers found that a great deal of their time and energy was being spent in defending themselves, their property, and their liberty. But in order for man to prosper, he cannot afford to spend his time constantly guarding his family and his property against attack and theft. So he joins together with his neighbors and hires a sheriff. At this precise moment, government is born. The individual citizens delegate to the sheriff their unquestionable right to protect themselves. The sheriff does for them only what they had a right to do for themselves, nothing more. Now let us go a step further in the question of man's right to delegate power. Suppose Pioneer A has one horse. He also wants another horse, but does not have the money or other means to buy one. Pioneer B has 3 horses, and Pioneer A decides that he would like to share in his neighbor's good fortune. Is he entitled to take one of his neighbor's horses? Obviously not. If his neighbor wishes to give it or to lend it, that is another question. But so long as Pioneer B wishes to keep his property, A has no just claim to it. If A has no proper power to take B's property, he obviously cannot delegate any such power to the sheriff. Even if everyone in the community desires that B give his extra horse to A, they have no right individually or collectively to force him to do so. They cannot delegate a power they themselves do not have. No government can justly claim the power to seize and redistribute the people's wealth and property, or to force reluctant citizens to perform acts of charity against their will. Government is created by man, and no man possesses any such power to delegate to government. Therefore, the proper role of the various levels of government include such defensive activities as maintaining the national military and local police forces for protection against loss of life, loss of property, and loss of liberty at the hands of either foreign despots or domestic criminals. It also includes those powers necessarily incidental to the protective function, such as the maintenance of courts, where those charged with crimes may be tried and where disputes between citizens may be impartially settled. The establishment of a monetary system and a standard of weights and measures so that courts may render monetary judgments, taxing authorities may levy taxes, and citizens may have a uniform standard to use in their business dealings. Before people lend their support to any government program or project, they should examine it carefully. Those who give their support to questionable government programs are acting very short-sightedly. They ignore history and fail to recognize that government is no plaything. As George Washington warned, government is not reason. It is not eloquence. It is force. Like fire, it is a dangerous servant and a fearful master. Copies of the Constitution are widely available. This is a standard that each of us can refer to and use in determining whether a law is good or bad. This inspired document is a solemn agreement between the citizens of this nation, which every officer of government is under a sacred duty to obey. Our Constitution wisely limits the functions of the federal government, leaving the great bulk of the legitimate activities of government to be carried out at the state or local level. It is a firm and sound principle that the smallest or lowest level of government that can possibly undertake the task is the one that should do so. First, the city or community. If they cannot handle the problem, then the county level of government should be considered. If the county level is unable to deal successfully with the problem, then next the state. And only if no smaller unit can possibly do the job should the federal government be considered. This is merely the application to the field of politics of that wise and time-tested principle of never asking a larger group to do that which can be done by a smaller group. Thomas Jefferson understood this principle very well and cautioned, "Let the national government be entrusted with the defense of the nation and its foreign and federal relations. The state governments with the civil rights, law, police, and administration of what concerns the state generally. The counties were the local concerns of the counties, and each ward direct the interests within itself. This great American patriot went on to answer a question that seems to have confused man throughout history. What has destroyed liberty and the rights of man in every government which has ever existed under the sun? The generalizing and concentrating of cares and powers into one body. It is well to remember that it was the 13 separate and sovereign states of this republic that created the federal government and delegated certain limited powers to it. The federal government did not create the states. Welfare programs, schemes for distribution of the wealth, and other programs which coerce people into acting in accordance with a prescribed code of social planning are government activities which today pose a grave danger to the individual American's continued freedom. A simple test can be applied to every government program. Do I, as an individual, have a right to use force upon my neighbor to accomplish a particular goal? If I do have such a right, then I may delegate that power to my government to exercise on my behalf. But if I do not have that right as an individual, then I cannot delegate it to any level of government. To be sure, there are times when this principle of the proper role of government is most annoying and inconvenient. But the creature will exceed its creator and become the master if government is permitted to manufacture its own authority out of thin air and to create self-proclaimed powers not delegated to it by the people. Once government seizes the aggressive role of redistributing the wealth and providing so-called benefits for some of its citizens, it then becomes a means for what is accurately described as legalized plunder. Legal plunder is defined by Bastia as, quote, when a portion of wealth is transferred from the person who owns it without his consent and without compensation, and whether by force or by fraud to anyone who does not own it, then I say that property is violated, that an act of plunder is committed, unquote. Once legal plunder begins occurring, history proves that each class or special interest group competes with the others to grasp and throw the lever of governmental power in their favor, or at least to immunize itself against the effects of a previous thrust. Labor gets a minimum wage. Agriculture receives a price support. Consumers insist on price controls. And industry gets protective tariffs. In the end, none of them are much further ahead. But all of them lose some of their personal freedom. The welfare state, and finally totalitarianism, has always been the end result when the principle of the protective function of government gives way to the aggressive or distributive function. This is a vitally important but seldom heeded lesson that history offers. It is people who work and produce, that create wealth. All historians know that no government in the history of mankind has ever created any wealth. According to